Hello everybody, my name is Johan Hedberg. Regardless of the picture being shown there, I'm actually a consultant from Sweden, so I'm working for a company called Excellent at the moment. And I'm going to talk about BizTalk Server behind enemy lines. So we've had some talks here about Azure, and we've had some talks here about the open source and those kind of products, and maybe some of you now are expecting me to do this battle thing here behind enemy. It sounds like an epic battle going on, like they pulled out their RabbitMQ, we went service bus, but no. And there's been talk about dinosaurs and all kinds of stuff, but see, behind enemy lines, the title of this session for me is that behind enemy lines mean that you need to blend in, right? You have to kind of take it as you go and adopt to the environment that you're in, and that's really what this is about. So over the last year, I've been working in a really Java and open source oriented environment and customer. And I've been doing as much of Java and application development on that side as I have been doing integration and BizTalk work, right? So a subtitle of this presentation could really be BizTalk Server in Java land. That being said, this is not going to be a technical presentation like, well, we wanted to integrate this Java SOAP endpoint with BizTalk, and there's framework collision, and I had to go adopt and do those kind of things. That's not going to be the topic of this presentation. Instead, I'm going to focus on the pieces of the application lifecycle management of BizTalk and the tooling that we used and the platforms that we used and the practices that we used in this environment to kind of fit in and to blend in and to make it easy for everyone in the organization to understand what we were doing, right? So using other kind of buzzwords and used out words, you could call this modern development practice on top of BizTalk. And if you wanted to sprinkle that, sprinkle some other buzzwords on top of that, you could say that I'm going to talk about agile development practices as they are within the Java development, application development in this organization, applied to the BizTalk environment as well, right? And there's also just to make sure I fit it all in there, right? There's also a very key element here of DevOps. So I'm going to talk about what that means and how we did that. But first of all, I'm going to just talk about this, back to this blending in thing. So I want to show this, Lord of the Rings, the One Ring, because what I see as a problem a lot of the times is that we as integration developers for a long time has had a stable platform. So a stable platform means that we have a kind of a way to do things. We're used to doing things a certain way, and we've been getting away with that for a long time since the platform has been stable. So for a long time, our ways of developing towards that platform has also been kind of stable, right? With the application development world moving much more rapidly into new types of patterns and practices and way to build teams and everything like that, I would say that the integration development teams and the integration environment hasn't really moved all that fast, right? So that there's one way for you to do things. There's one type of application team foundation that you probably want to use for your BizTalk server, for your build and for your deploy and for your work item tracking. There's one type of tooling that you choose to use for your monitoring. There's one type of tooling that you choose to use for other types of things. And don't get me wrong here. I mean, there is definitely one type of solution that I would, be the first that I would want to apply to my BizTalk server integration environment. And I could even at this point, that's not the case 5 years ago, but at this point, I can even recommend that to the Java application development side, saying that you could build your Java applications on top of that. You can do your Maven builds on top of this just as easily as you could do your BizTalk builds and integration projects on top of that. But that's certainly not the case 5 years ago. And being in that world, they have chosen the platforms that they thought, and they in this case is the Java application guys, that they thought was the best fit for them. And kind of the thing here is that we're trying to fit into that world. So we have chosen a couple of different patterns and practices and tooling to allow us to fit into that world as well. Because at the end of the day, what you really want to get out of your solution is a couple of metrics, right? Or a couple of best practices that you want to follow. And these are basically the same regardless if you're using BizTalk and doing integration development or if you're doing application development. So there's a whole bunch of these. I'm going to focus during this 25 minutes that I've got left on a couple of these, right? So you really want your process to be agile and you want things to be automated. And what I mean by that is you want to have the ability to do things quickly. You don't want to, the MSI is a perfect delivery solution for BizTalk, but unless you automate on top of that, there's a lot of manual steps there. You want to get rid of all those steps, at least that's the way we saw it, get rid of all those steps that will make quick delivery hard and that will be able to introduce human errors into that process. You want to eliminate those. So you want that thing to be automated. You also want to process, and I'm talking about all the way from you getting your requirements to you actually delivering those into production, that's fully transparent. And I'm talking about transparent here from the point that your product owner gives you that requirement during the whole development process where you're using your development branch and you're continuing that on and you're doing quality testing on that and you've actually approved that thing and you're getting deployed to different kinds of environment as you go on, and when that thing goes into production. You want information of that to be available to everyone, and you want them to be able to see what you're doing. So basically, if you go back to Michael Stevenson's presentation, you had that integration ninja and that secret box. That's what you don't want, right? You want people to understand what you're doing and to be able to trust in you, not by you saying that, like, I'm the ninja, I got this, right? But actually by being able to see what you're doing and see that you're progressing the way that you should and doing the things that will ultimately reach the goals that they want you to reach. And finally, you want something that's familiar, right, and that's maintainable. And at that point, I'm not talking about, you as an integration developer want something that's familiar for you. That's also the case, right? But development is just a small part of the life cycle of your solution. You'll typically spend much more time after you've actually developed that thing than you actually did developing it, right? So it needs to be familiar and maintainable for all the people that comes after you. Not just easy for you to develop it and release it to production, although that's important as well, but to be able to iterate on that, deploy it again, do bug fixes, etc., right? And you want that for your ops guys and for your development people that comes after you both, not just for developers. So the focus of all of those things at this point is just to blend into the solution, blend into, in this case, in my case, blend into the Java application development world where this solution, this BizTalk Server solution was at, right? So we've seen examples here of the type of tooling that it's in Azure and that's in Visual Studio and that you would use to solve this. So in this case, the tooling we used, and I'm not trying to sell this as a best practice or your first choice or these are the tools you should use and these are the best tools. I'm trying to say that to fit in, these are the best tools that we could use in that particular situation, right? So Jira, probably a lot of people here has worked with Jira for issue handling and bug tracking and stuff like that, right? It's the equivalent to work items if you would be using Team Foundation, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but that's really not the focus of this presentation. And then we use source control, obviously, and my thought here is a lot of you, since that is my history at least and my background, a lot of you are probably using Team Foundation Server and Team Foundation version control. But we started using Git and we started using what's formerly known as Stash and is now Bitbucket Server from Atlassian as well as the repository server for our Git, right? Our Git repositories. So we weren't using GitHub, we were using this one. So Team Foundation Server, again, will work just as fine as that piece of the puzzle. In this case, in this world, it was Stash and Bitbucket Server. I'm going to look a little on that. I wanted to ask around before I started this presentation, and I've asked a few people, well, really like to get like a feeling of the room. How many people are using Team Foundation version control in here? So raise of hands. So that's almost everyone. So of you, how many people are using Git with Team Foundation? Okay, fair enough. That's like maybe a sixth or a seventh piece of the room. So not very much, but at least a few of you, right? And then for build and deploy, we use another piece of the puzzle, which is Bamboo. It's the name of the build server. And we have a lot to do moving everything and being able to realize all of our integrations on that server. So we also have a history of where we use Jenkins, because the Java developers were using Jenkins at that point. So we used it for the BizTalk solution as well. And as they move over to Bamboo, the BizTalk server solution do as well. And finally, we're using the Elastic Stack. for doing tracking, for doing search, and for doing visualization as part of the DevOps experience and for the operations guys, right? So we're going to look a little on how that looked in more detail, right? So first off, source control, right? So a lot of you are probably familiar with source control, so I'm going to pass by these first couple of slides really quickly, just to set the stage for like 7/8 of the room that didn't raise your hand at Git, right? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So usually you get latest, right? You do some kind of change and you check in. Once you get more advanced, you'd obviously have more branches, right? Same thing applies. You develop your features and you do that on your main branch usually if you just have two. And then once you're happy with it, you obviously then check in the code and everything and you merge it to your release branch. Both of these branches are long-lived, right? They will continue on forever. And you'll be working, you'll be changing those. And if you follow best practices, probably you'll have something that looks like this, right? You have your dev branch, you'll have your main branch, and you'll have your release branch. And you'll stabilize things on dev, and then when you're happy to release that to QA and call that version next, you'll put that into main, and once you have enough stuff there, you'll make a release, and you're going to release that, and you're happy with that, right? But on your local machine, it's all just files, right? If the file becomes writable, it becomes checked out, and once you're happy with it, you check it in, and they go up into the central repository. So Git works a little bit differently. So you have a central repository here where if you don't build that out, you'll have a master branch, right? And that's the first branch you'll have. So you will clone that into a local repository. And once you're in the local repository, the terminology here is that you'll commit things to your local repository, right? And there's a lot of terminology differences here that I won't go into. That's probably like a full day in itself, I guess, using Git and all of its different colors or variations in syntaxes. But you'll commit it. And once you're happy with that, now you'll have different versions of that locally. Because I'm pretty sure I've done this in the past. I'm pretty sure that other people have done this in the past as well, where you're in the middle of a change and you don't really want to check it in yet. So you'll actually take that folder, you'll kind of make a copy of that folder. I want to remember this point, but I also want to continue making changes. So at this point, instead, what you'll do is you'll continue committing things to your local repository. So you're happy, you have all that version controlled. And once you're happy with that, you'll push that up to your central repository. So you have that available there. And obviously, you'll continue on. And once there's something that someone else has pushed to the central repository, you'll be able to pull that change down into your local repository. And you'll continue working that way with the central and local repository model. So, and we're doing this obviously for BizTalk as well. So once you get a little bit more advanced, you'll have several branches. Now there's still the local repository and the central repository model on top of this. It's just now you have several branches just as you would in Team Foundation version control, right? So now that you're starting to work on your features, what you do in Git is you'd usually create a separate branch out of your develop branch and you'd work on your feature in that. And if there's a hotfix happening from your production environment, you'd make a short-lived branch as part of that, right? And once you're happy with something, obviously you create a release branch, and once you're happy with that, you can go into production and merge that thing to master. And if you're working on features in parallel, you'd have different branches, right? And once you're happy with what you've done in your feature, you would merge that down. So all well and good, and you can do merge if you have that user rights on the repository, and that's fine. The difference here, of course, is that Git's more feature prone, or it's more branch prone, so you work in these short-lived branches. But what we do, and what I think there's a big case for, is that instead of just doing a merge here, which if you work towards GitHub, you'll often do a fork, and then you'll do a pull request, and that's based on the fact that you don't have rights in the repository that you want the changes to get into, right? But when you're working in a local repository, you will have those rights. But still, what we do, and what I really encourage you to do is you work with pull requests. And the pull request in this case is, I'm pretty sure a lot of you kind of have the idea of code review and of pair programming, and you know that once you've built that hugely complex orchestration, what you'd really want to do is make sure that more people in your team know about it. So on the pull request, kind of motivates you to really have that as part of your culture, because what it says is that before you can actually merge your code into the development branch, someone else has to approve it, right? And part of the tooling that we use help us do that. So in this case, what we use to do that is the Bitbucket server, or the, in this case, this still says stash, but they've updated the product name, right? So in this case, I'm actually at the user interface for a pull request, right? So this is a specific pull request, and you can view your other pull requests should you have them. So I can see here that there are several pull requests for me to review. And what's this saying is that there's been several features that other developers has made, and they want me to review their changes, want me to look at their integration, at the features they've committed, so that it's okay. It follows the blueprint that we as a team has jointly agreed upon. You're following that. You haven't, you've implemented your tests. You haven't, created any. I don't have it for BizTalk, but if you do regular application development, in this case Java application development, we'll also have analytics of code coverage, of if you've increased or decreased the technical depth and things like that. So those things need to pass and need to be approved for it to be okay for you to merge your code back into, in this case, the development branch, right? So there are a lot of different features that you can view here, but there's also, you can look at the commits that have been made as part of this. You can look at the differences on the actual files, how they looked before and how they looked after. Obviously, with BizTalk Maps and BizTalk Orchestration, that doesn't really tell you much most of the time, but you can view them, and you can view other files this way, right? There's also transparency into you being able to, at the pull request level, go further, right? In this case, what I've highlighted here is the actual Jira ticket, or the work item that started all this work. So you can go back to this, while following that link, go back to Jira, and you can look at things like what was the actual description for this, who was the person assigned to do it, how many story points did we estimate this to take. But in this case, I've scrolled down a bit because I want to highlight a couple of other things. So now back at your Jira ticket, and this is probably something most of the time that your product owner will have created for you and said that this is the thing that we want you to work on, right? And over here, I can see that I have transparency. I have information back to my product owner saying that, we've taken this into development. We've actually created a couple of branches for this and a couple of different repositories. There's been a couple of commits around this. I've actually, now created a couple of pull requests for this, and I can also view things like, there's a couple of builds having been done for this, and I've actually deployed this out to a number of different environments. Right? So you get insight into what's happening all the time. You can follow along in the process as a product owner when you go back to check on your ticket, right? So there's a lot of different things, and you can burrow down in this, and there's a multitude of different things that you can look at and report and stuff like that. But I want to go back to the pull request in this case. And so also from there, we can look at the build that was created as part of the code check-in that was automatically triggered in this case. So you may also set up metrics saying like this can't be approved until it's passed a successful build, until it has successful tests being passed, and so on. So in this case, let's look at if we follow that link to the build, we can see here that this build was, was successfully built. If we wanted to, we could go look at the tests being triggered here, the results of those tests, the artifact that was produced by this build, other types of metadata around this. We could see the number of commits here, and if we would scroll down here, we could see G ratios and stuff like that that this build was based on. We can also see information here around what deployments did this build continue into. Right? So we can track this all along from the Jira ticket to the actual check-ins, to the code, to the build being made, and also along to the deployments and the actual environments this was deployed to. So I'm not sure how well this gets visualized out in the back, and I'm not even going to try to do the zoom thing because I'm never going to get back to normal. But what it says basically is that, well, this has been deployed to my dev environment, but it has since been replaced by a later build. It says it's been deployed to my QA environment, but it's oh, wait a minute, doesn't matter. It's been replaced at my QA environment by another build, and I haven't deployed it yet for my production environment. Yeah, right? And there was this previous mention in one of the earlier presentations, like, where's the deploy button at? Is my mouse actually on that slide? See if I can get there. Where am I? I should have done duplicate. Anyway, over there, there's my deploy button. So I can also, here from my build, go ahead and say, I want to deploy this now to production, right? That's not what I want to do at the moment. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to explain this step a little better. So you probably want to know, how's that deploy even happening? At least I hope you're wondering that, because that's where I'm going next, right? So in that case, this is the configuration for the deployment piece of this. This is also in the Bamboo build server. So at this point, what I'm saying is, and what I'm looking at is, I have a couple of different environments, and I have expanded the configuration here for our QA environment. All of them looks the same. So in this case, I have a couple of different things I can do here. I have triggers here. For example, in this case, what I've set up here is that as soon as my development branch has a new build, this will automatically get deployed to my QA environment, right? And I also have things like notifications here. So I can notify, a product owner saying that this build now got deployed to this environment, which contains these changes for you from these Jira issues, right? And that's insight. That's something that they're really interested in knowing. Or I could also do things that we do here, like say, notify someone in a chat room, send an email, or do something when this happens, right? So it's all automated. Again, it's all a full chain of things that happens when in this case, I have a trigger on my, like I said, my development environment. And I can also go in here and I can edit how this deploy actually looks. So the fact of the matter here is that, yes, I'm using Bamboo as a platform to do my builds and deploys, but it doesn't really look all that exciting once I go into looking at how this is configured. Because what I'm actually using here isn't the power of this particular build server, of this particular deploy system. In fact, what I'm using here is, in fact, a series of PowerShell scripts, right? So what's actually happening here, the process actually being triggered here is, I'm taking the server offline, I'm undeploying the previous solution, I'm deploying a new solution, I'm running my tests, and if those passes, not my unit tests, those are run previously, but my scenarios, my end-to-end integration tests, I trigger those, and if those are successful, I'll take the server back online again, right? So, like I said, this is Bamboo. Previously, both the Java side and the BizTalk side actually used Jenkins. So a lot of the stuff that we do are still being deployed through Jenkins. That looks slightly different. Doesn't really matter what it looks like. It has the same basic steps, right? It's, you do the build. In this case, we also need to distribute the code somewhere, because in the Bamboo case, the server took care of that. In this case, we have to take care of that. And we deploy the solution. And if we dive deeper into that, that's still the same steps that we had earlier. Those are still the same PowerShell script that we execute the same way. So had we taken a step back here and say, how would I do this using Team Foundation Server? Well, in our case, I would have done the same things, right? I would have triggered the same PowerShell scripts that I do in this solution. Finally, if we look at the visualization part of this, so I said we put tracking and other types of data into the Elastic Stack. So this is just one view of that. This is the visualization view of that. So I can do both. I can both search after things. So if I would have tracked something like order ID, I could have searched like every place where order ID exists, and I've gotten a search result saying order ID appeared in these places. But I can also aggregate that in different ways. And in this case, there are a number of different visualizations in how this has been aggregated. And I'm not saying this isn't monitoring. This isn't the level of monitoring we do. We also have monitoring on a server level, which is monitoring disk and memory and processor and services being online and database jobs working fine and stuff like that. Doesn't come close to compare to the amazing capabilities of BizTalk 360 or something like that. But the point of this is that in the way that they've chosen to kind of apply a DevOps perspective into the workplace, one of those things is we have huge monitors standing in a lot of different places in the office, right? And that's perfect place for us to have these kind of visualizations rolling, right? Because when you walk around in the office, you'll glance at these, and you'll get an immediate kind of appreciation of is that thing that that increase in traffic that we see here, is that normal? We'll go, yeah, that's normal, because actually that's like from 6 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and that's what happens with this workload every day, so that's normal. And also the product owner loves to view graphs like this. It's visual, right? So they can get to be somewhat happy from this as well. And also, for some reason, the operations guys also loves graphs. So apart from just command line tools, they also love graphs. So I only have 2 minutes left. So kind of the summary of this is that for me, going behind enemy lines, the purpose of that was just showing a real-world example of how could you fit into a world where Java development, Java application development, and that tooling being selected for fitting that world best. How could you fit BizTalk Server into that world without compromising on anything, really? With getting really the full process that you'd want, the full DevOps experience and the full automation experience, but still, fitting in, making things transparent for everyone in the organization, and using the agile processes and tools at the place where the installation is. So really, it's not just, there's not one single solution that's always the best. The best solution is always kind of adapted to the place where that environment is, right? And preferably, that's, again, the same tool as everything else and everyone else in the organization uses, or you will become that, integration ninja and that secret box, right, where, you can't get any insight into that thing. If you don't have insight, you can't have full trust either. So common practice, a common vocabulary goes back to using Git instead of using Team Foundation source control for BizTalk. We'd use Git just to be able to talk about things and use the practices, the same practices everyone else uses to pull requests in the organization, right? Because we don't want to stand out more than we already do with the BizTalk Server and a Java, strategy place. And again, I'll emphasize the fact that I really love how code or how pull requests has fed the culture of actually transferring knowledge between developers. Because most of the time, a lot of the time at least, it happens where you've built this really super duper complex orchestration. You're really happy with the result, and someone else, a couple of months later, has to go in and look at that thing, and you're the only one who knows about it, and you might not even be at that place anymore. So it's always good to pass knowledge along, right? And pull request really helps with that culture. And again, visibility to everyone, break out of the box, right? It's all about integration, not only integration on the platform and runtime level, but integration into the organization, the practices where you work as a team member in a team in an IT organization. So that's it, 1 minute left. 1 minute for questions. Okay, question?
Yeah. Obviously, there was a lot of changes compared to what we used to using, knowing you. Which was the biggest single challenge to adapt to that new kind of environment?
Oh, it certainly wasn't technical. So the question was, what was the biggest challenge adapting to this environment? So, and it certainly wasn't technical. The technical piece was, it took some time. And I wasn't even responsible for most of it. Some of it happened before I was even there, to be fair. Just the latter parts of it happened with me there. But it's, regardless of my presence or not, it's a great story, right? No, but the biggest change for me was the cultural piece, right? Actually working as part of a team, working as part of an agile team, working towards DevOps practices, working with getting the full visibility into the tooling and the organization, and being transparent and always adapting. Because it would have been easy to continue along the path that we were, saying that when I arrived, for example, we were using Team Foundation source control, and we were that black box. No one else had visibility into what we were doing. But the change there wasn't moving technically, it was moving mentally and getting into the same practices. Thank you.